You know when you've got a Labour politician on the back foot because they'll start to throw out supposed insults about sixth form politics or student politics, despite the fact that young people are often the most inspirational, articulate and clear people with a vision of our future. One of those people is the amazing Mikaela Loach. She is an activist, campaigner and author. Check out her books. And today I'm delighted she's in the studio to talk about all things climate and all things justice.
Hey Zack, Chris Packham here. I just want to tell you about something really exciting. Ecotalk. It's a phone company that helps restore nature and it's brilliant. You can find out more about it at ecotalk.co.uk.
Incredibly excited to have you on, Mikaela. We were on a panel recently together and I remember the first question from George Monbiot was, what gives you hope? And then you spoke just before me. And then I often don't prepare an answer. I prefer to just kind of listen and respond. And there was nothing I could say in that moment other than Mikaela gives me hope. Just listen to the answer she's just given. So I'm feeling all of those feelings again. I know you're going to COP in a couple of weeks in Brazil, and I did an interview about COP yesterday. The interview was kind of framed around, is COP a waste of time? And I have very mixed feelings about that. So rather than me broadcasting my feelings, what are your feelings?
Yeah, I also, firstly, thank you so much for having me. And also thank you for saying that. It was also nice that you said that in that moment, because to be honest, sometimes I feel like politicians will say those kind of things and it feels like you're being like tokenized in some way. But I didn't feel that way at all. Good. It felt very like genuine. And I just genuinely feel like you're a very genuine person, which is something that's very refreshing, I think, for a lot of people. With COPs, so basically this like big UN climate conference, which is the like international space where climate negotiations happen, things like the Paris Agreement that people have probably heard of, that gets talked about, that's then used in a lot of legal cases around pushing for climate action that we need. Movements across the world, and especially movements from the global south as well, it depends on what movements you're talking to, but have found a way of sitting in the between of the let's try and leverage as much as we can this space that does exist and put pressure on it where we can to get gains that we need. Things like funding for the damages that have happened because of climate breakdown, things like trying to get more climate finance for the countries that need that most. These things, that space can be useful for pushing for, whilst at the same time recognising this like inherent inequality of the space and the limitations of it, and not relying on it and realising that actually like emissions reductions that we need are more likely to be pushed like through kind of domestic ways of organising. So, you know, organising in your community, organising, like putting pressure on your local government, building power. That is really important. I think will push the kind of transformational societal change that we need to tackle the climate crisis through. And we can't just leave it to these international negotiations that have also proven themselves to fail, unfortunately, time and time again. The COP process is obviously like inherently not great in the sense of the fact that it's inherently very unequal. A lot of very like rich countries who have historically emitted so much more end up with a lot of power in the process. There's a lot of lobbying that happens, like a huge amount of fossil fuel lobbyists go along and put pressure on negotiations and very much undermine the democracy of that. And so people are like, you know, just get rid of the whole COP process. We just need something different and we need to not engage with it at all. Or I think people go on the other side of, this is so important. All of, you know, people from all the world are together, governments all together. We have to put all into this, and this is the solution to this global issue. I think it's important for us to sit somewhere in the middle, which is actually where a lot of people's movements across the world who have been for a long time.
That was so beautifully put. You talked about loss and damage there. For the audience who might not necessarily know what we're talking about, what specifically is loss and damage?
Yeah, loss and damage is basically the things that have been already lost and damaged because of the climate crisis. So if we think about, you know, how Pakistan experienced extreme flooding in recent years, that like put almost a third of the country's population into displacement and damaged their homes and their livelihoods. That's the damage that's been created because of the climate crisis. So, you know, Pakistan is as well as an example of a country where they have to pay more of their percentage of their their country's budget to paying back loans and debt than they do on like healthcare because of colonial loan debt structures that we have. And that means they don't have the money to be able to pay for the damages that have happened, whilst Pakistan also is not like responsible for these damages historically when we look at emissions. So loss and damage is basically saying we need to pay for the things that have been lost and the things that have been damaged, and we need to give the countries that need that finance, and that should be coming from those countries that have historically caused the most harm. So like if we think about, in the pre-industrial era, the UK is responsible for like 96% of historic emissions. If we look at kind of emissions from now, the US is kind of responsible for 40% of historic emissions, like up to kind of today. So that responsibility sits with those countries that have caused the most of the issue. It's kind of like if I went into your house and I just like started spraying water around everywhere, and then you'd obviously say to me like, hey, could you pay for those damages that you've caused? But then that's just kind of like a common sense, obvious thing. But through the COP process, through lobbying, like these global north, richer countries, EU, UK, US can often try and present it as if this is like wildly unfair and like, how could you expect us to pay for this? But I think, again, we need to realise we live in this like globalised world now. Our ability to have like safe, free, happy, fulfilled lives here in the UK is actually inherently connected to the ability of people across the world to have safe, free, happy lives. And for other things that we have in our lives, many of those things come from places like Pakistan and other places across the world. So if we choose to just completely abandon these other countries and peoples across the world, that will have a knock-on effect here as well. And so there obviously is like a moral argument, but there's also like a very practical, I think, argument for why we need to work together and make sure that we have a transition that allows everyone to get on board and everyone to be safe and well.
And this is a really important COP because all the countries will be putting in their 10-year plans for NDC's nationally determined contributions. We've also got the second administration of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I was trying to find a way to phrase the question. How problematic is Donald Trump? Seems a ridiculous question, but what is the potential for America to disrupt the entire kind of global consensus?
I mean, America's already, I also hate saying America, the United States of America, because America like encompasses two continents that are with lots of people. That's why I try and be deliberate about saying like US American rather than just American.
No,
as
you're
well.
spot on, and it's a good call for me too.
No. It's, but
coming on my podcast and calling out. No, we're always learning.
The US has like historically disrupted negotiations. So this is not a new thing, and that's why I think I do think it is significant, the difference with Trump, obviously, and that's probably obvious to everyone. But I do have a level of frustration when it's almost made out that the US has only just become disruptive now that Trump is in power. Like the US has been disrupting these negotiations for a very long time. Like the COPs that I've been to, it's usually that, progress looks like it's going to happen. And then late in the day, the US decides to back out of everything because they're pursuing their own interests rather than the interests of the collective. And then it will end up that like countries will kind of form blocks and vote together. So like there's the like Global South bloc that have like many countries who will come together and try and vote together, and many times have said they'll walk out if the deal doesn't change. But the US still has so much like geopolitical power across countries across the world that they end up being able to dictate many things that happen. I think a really good example of how COPs work was actually, there was a play recently called Kyoto. Did you see it?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I thought it was really good. I don't know if you know the TikTok trend that was like, is this play about us? That's how I felt when I was sitting the audience, because I was like, oh, this actually feels like an accurate depiction of the way that the negotiations become undermined and how lobbying works. And in that play as well, it showed how the US was like colluding with the fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel lobbyists, and how these lobbyists actually came from the US. And this kind of start of big fossil fuel lobbying like was born in the US. And so I want to resist the narrative that has just come in with Trump, whilst it is significant how Trump is and how much he like completely just kind of disregards internationalism completely. This has been a longer term issue. And so the solution to like Trumpism and Trump is not to like replace him with a Democrat that will be the same that we've had before. We need like something dramatically different that is actually going to serve the people and not the elite class and not the fossil fuel industry.
100%. Also, my friend Dale Rapley was in that play. That's not significant to anything other than shout out to the entire cast.
They were so brilliant. I thought they honestly did such a good job. I kind of went in expecting to be disappointed, because I've seen quite a few climate plays that have just been a bit pants. But it was really, really good. Did a great job.
And so obviously we've got that kind of big international picture, which you've just laid out there. And you mentioned community organising. How do we find that balance between that kind of hyper-local work that people can do as opposed to just watching these negotiations on screen and feeling totally detached from what's happening?
I think that's where this kind of balance that I was speaking about before comes from, because what we cannot afford to do is defer our responsibility and agency and power to elected officials only. So like whether it is political leaders, even like yourself, or whether it is civil servants who are working as negotiators during COP processes, or whether it is elected leaders who are then going to negotiate these COP processes, we cannot afford to defer our responsibilities to other people, because I think it disempowers all of us, and I think it really limits the future that we'll be able to actually achieve. How I define organising is building the capacity for revolutionary change to be possible. So it doesn't necessarily mean like making that change right now. I see organising as distinct from like mobilising or campaigning. Campaigns and mobilisation can be part of organising, but they are different from organising. Organising is about how do we resource our communities, how do we build the power of our communities, how do we politically educate our communities so that when the conditions are right, like the transformational change that we need is possible because we built those conditions. And that transformational change that we need, we might think strategically of how to build that through campaigns and through mobilisations. But I think that what happens too often is we have a lot of mobilisations, a lot of mobilising, maybe a lot of campaigning. We could do some more campaigning as well, but not enough of that organising, so that when the mobilisations need to happen, they're not as like pivotal as they could have been, because we're not focusing enough on the organising, and because maybe we're believing that we have to defer our power, defer our responsibility to a hero or an elected leader. But that narrative is just incredibly disempowering, because it's just not true of how change actually happens. But we're told these stories at school or through the media that transformational changes were created by these incredible heroes of the past or the present. Like, the entire civil rights movement was just MLK. No one else was there. Is what the way that we're told history, as if that it was just he gave some great speeches and wrote some great letters, and that's how change happened. Or even today, like sometimes people will think like, the climate movement, especially the youth climate movement, was just Greta Thunberg, and she just had to say some speeches at the UN and wake people up, and that was all it was. When in reality, like if we look at the civil rights movement, like Martin Luther King Jr. was chosen by a group of black women in the church who had been already organising for civil rights for a long time, and they needed a charismatic leader who could galvanise people, but who played a role as part of a wider movement. Kwame Ture talked a lot about how Martin Luther King, he was a great mobiliser, but he was not a great organiser in the same way. He was very good at mobilising people because that was his role, but he wasn't, down on the ground, let's build that capacity of the community. And that's not to disrespect him. I obviously have a huge amount of respect for his work and his legacy, and I've learned so much from it. It's more just that I think we need to tell the truth of how change has happened in the past, so we can understand how we can make it in the future. And then also so we can empower ourselves to realise that we actually have a role that is as important as that person that we see, if not sometimes more important, I think, and that so much of that happens underground and behind the scenes.
Yeah, something that really struck me was Chloe Swarbrick came on the podcast, who's the co-leader of the New Zealand Greens, and she talked about, and it's certainly been my experience, that as I'm going around the country, people tell me constantly how hopeful they're feeling and how I give them hope. Yeah. Now, that's obviously a really lovely thing to hear, and at the same time, it makes me uncomfortable, because I go, for this exact reason, I don't want you to keep finding hope in me. I actually need you to go to your local party, your local community, and do the work, and I'll absolutely shout about it on TV and in front of a microphone, but we all really need to do the work, or those who have the power and the privilege and the choice to be able to do the work need to ally with the people who don't have the choice to do the work. How do we get that through to people? Or maybe that's the wrong question, because even that's a top-down question, right?
Well, no, I do think that, like, for example, me and you, I do think our roles in many ways is to try and communicate that to people, and I think you do a brilliant job of doing that. And also, you have made me feel very hopeful as well. But I think that hopeful feeling has come from because I don't feel like you're telling everyone that you are the Messiah who will save us all, I think instead, and I also, maybe some of that hope that I get from you comes from the fact that, like, we first met at a very tiny protest around the Bibi Stockholm, the floating asylum detention centre, and the fact that to me showed how, and this was quite a few years ago, but how you would just show up for the smaller stuff that is community based, and that you care about that, and that you gave that your energy and your time, and you didn't feel like you were detached from it, which also made me feel quite hopeful as well when I then saw that you were putting in your leadership bid and joined the Greens because of that, to vote for you.
And welcome.
Thank you. But I think the way that we do that is partly to visualize how change really happens, and because we're having to do the work of kind of unlearning the way that we currently think it happens, and these ideas of heroism and these ideas of individualism, which is like a thing that's just been like hammered into us since like Thatcher and Pinochet and like the kind of rise of neoliberalism. This thing of like that we are individuals separate from each other, we're not connected to each other. The conditions that we live in are like our fault or our success. Either of those things. Either it's our failure if we are not living the life that we want to live, or it's only due to our like personal things that we have done, whether if we live a successful life. We have to kind of undo so much of that, I think, in order to understand the power that we have as individuals as well. Because we have to understand also how the system works in order to understand that power, I think. Because if you think that, you know, the reason that you are struggling to feed your kids whilst you're like working multiple jobs, or because you have a chronic illness that means you're not able to work and you feel like it's your fault and that makes you a bad person, that's going to disempower you generally, because you'll think, I don't have power generally, or I'm not a good enough person to do something. And that's, I think, a way that like neoliberalism as this like political ideology really impacts us on an interpersonal level and disempowers us beyond the like economic practical stuff as well. Where if instead we realise that there is like active collusion and action that happens by like big businesses, by, you know, CEOs, by billionaires in particular, and then them colluding with governments to create a system that puts you in that way in order for them to profit from you. So, for example, like your wages are being squeezed while billionaires are increasing their wealth all the time, and that is not your fault as a worker in that situation. That is being like orchestrated on you. And that is not to say you don't have any power. Instead, that's to say, okay, they're organising themselves in this way. How can we organise ourselves to build our own power? And therefore, how can we look at movements of the past that have gone through similar situations and worked out a way to build power differently? And then I think we realised that, like, when I do power mapping exercises, either like through the School of Organising that I run, or like when I have run trainings and things, it's quite easy for people to see if you do. So power mapping is like you do like a grid basically, and you're like most power, less power, like closest to your aims and ideals, furthest away from your aims and ideals. It's quite quick to see that like a group of people have a lot more power than an individual, just very easily once you're doing that. And so you realise that, if I want to change these things, I'm going to have to group up with more people and increase that power, and to think strategically, kind of in a similar way in which like the elite class are thinking very strategically and organising together. It's like, how can we also organise our communities, build our power? And then how can we learn of movements of the past, like whether it is, like there's a documentary called Crip Camp, which I think is really brilliant, which shows like the disability justice movement in the US, and how like kids who'd gone to the same disabled camp, like over the summer, then as adults, had already had these connections with each other, and then organised together in solidarity with like the Black Panther movement, others, occupied buildings and pushed through a lot of the like civil rights for disabled people in the US that we see today. But instead we're told that like the world just gets better. Like if we just leave it as it is, it'll just get better and it'll get more progressive and things will change. I think we need to highlight how things don't just get better, people make them better, and they've made them better by coming together in movements, in collectives, building that power and pushing it through, and not just by relying on heroes or exceptional individuals, but realising that we all have power and that we can create that change together.
I'm feeling the hope again just listening to you. I think that is it. It's about that mirror, isn't it, of recognising our own agency of every single person. In the next few weeks, there's a decision to be made about Rosebank. For the audience who might not know what Rosebank is, could you kind of lay out what it is and why it's a horrendous thing? Yeah,
so the Rosebank oil field is like the biggest undeveloped oil field in the UK. So it's in the North Sea, which is like off the coast of Scotland. And it's being pushed through by Ithaca Energy, who are like part of Delek Group, which are an Israeli oil and gas firm. So the profits from Rosebank, if it was developed, will literally be going to support occupation and apartheid. Rosebank is also part owned by Equinor, which is a Norwegian state-owned oil and gas company. And Norway also gets a lot of Norway's so great and, well-being. They're doing good, the Scandi, all that kind of stuff. But what they're doing is pushing through this oil field that would be absolutely catastrophic for the climate. Like this oil field alone would produce more emissions than the 28 lowest income countries combined, like from one oil field. And we just don't need it. That's what's so frustrating to think about this whole thing, is that also Labour also said that they were going to have no new oil and gas fields as part of their pledge. So they should, and they have actually said in the courts they removed their defence of the field, but they should just be cancelling this completely. It's just common sense. It won't help energy bills in the UK. It won't help the cost of living crisis. All it's going to do is make more money for these oil and gas companies that have more money than they need, and it's going to put our collective future at more risk, and just goes against all of the climate science and advice that's been given, and even the advice that's given by not radical left organisations. Like the International Energy Agency is not a radical left organisation. They are a very conservative energy organisation, and they've said we can have no new investment in oil and gas if we want a future that we can all live in and survive in. And so pushing this through it's absolute nonsense, and it's ridiculous, and it just shouldn't be happening. But unfortunately, the fight has kind of come back now, and so it's important that I think all of us fight hard to stop Rosebank.
For sure, and the government are going to try and make the argument about jobs. And I spoke to Uplift the other day, who are a brilliant campaign organisation who are working in this area, who have said that jobs in the North Sea in oil and gas have halved over the last kind of few years anyway, so there aren't that many jobs. But let's say there are jobs. What is our answer to that in terms of the just transition, I suppose?
Well, I think the answer to that is to make sure that what you're saying is just transition. Just transition basically means how can we transition away from oil and gas into a green, renewable economy, society, energy system that does not disregard and leave behind workers. What we don't want to do is have Thatcher's, mass laying off of workers and decimation of worker power. Instead, I think it's very possible that we can have this transition that increases worker power, increases working conditions, makes these things better, but only if we prioritise that in the transition. And what we need to remember is that these oil and gas companies, they do not care about their workers. It's so deeply frustrating that it's even made out as a legitimate thing that they care about their workers, because they put on mass layoffs. As soon as they want to, increase their profits, the workers are who go first. As soon as they want to shut down some areas, they can make more profit elsewhere. They'll lay off all those workers immediately. What instead we need is commitment that workers will be retrained into the new industry and their jobs will be secured and made better, that they will be protected, they'll be able to unionise, they'll be able to have this power that they need. And all of that is very possible with a green transition. And I'd actually say more possible with a green transition, because we also can get to choose what is this new world that we want, what is this new energy system we want. We don't have to continue the way it has been now. And currently, workers have to do extremely unsafe jobs as well, without many protections, without many ability to properly unionise and properly use their collective bargaining power to make their workplace safer. And so I think it's really key that those of us who are pushing for this transition are in conversation with workers, with unions, and are really showing that we are on the same side and we are not on opposite sides, and that actually that it benefits these oil and gas CEOs who are making millions while many of their workers are not making anything close to that. It benefits them to create this narrative that we are divided. And that again plays into that individualism thing of we are separate from each other, we are not connected. And we have to always ask who benefits from this narrative. And I think with that narrative, it's obvious that the workers don't benefit from that narrative, and the only people who do are the millionaire and billionaire CEOs.
Really good point, and I want to pick that up. First, let's go for a quick break.
Hello, Zack. Chris Packham here. I hear you're being politically bold. Well, we at Ecotalk are being equally bold. It's the best service going, I've got to say. Best network coverage in the UK, lots of different deals, lots of packages, and if you get any trouble, you don't speak to a bot. You speak to a real human. But the best thing? The best thing is that the profits are going into nature conservation for beavers and badgers and birds and butterflies and lots of other things which don't begin with B. So, Zack, I'm telling you, if you want to talk bold, mate, you better be doing it on Ecotalk. And you can switch really easily at ecotalk.co.uk.
Earlier on, you talked about it wasn't a radical left position. Now, this word radical is a word that I sometimes find myself tripping over, because often right-wing journalists call oppositions radical, and I kind of balk at it, and I'm like, actually, no, what's radical is what's existing right now. But other times there are oppositions where we do want a radical transformation of society. Now, you wrote a book all about this. Is it that radical?
Well, the book's called It's Not That Radical, so...
Exactly.
But in that, like, the main argument is that often what the changes that we need, and I mean need, I'm not saying just want, like that we need to have a future that we can all survive in and thrive in, are framed by the mainstream media, for example, as like radical and extreme and all these different things, and as if the actions we need to take are like radical, ridiculous, like outrageous. What I'm saying in It's Not That Radical is that the things that we need to get this future are not like ridiculous or like impossible or extreme. What is really ridiculous and extreme is the like immense inequality that is normalized in our society and is increasing, ever increasing. It is ridiculous and extreme that the billionaire class are like increasing their wealth at like astronomical rates I think that people don't fully like comprehend and understand. And inequality is so vast and is getting more and more vast in a way that like studies have shown that the average population don't actually understand how unequal like our world is and our society is. And that again benefits this billionaire class. Like that's what's extreme, that's what's ridiculous, like that's what is outrageous. What is common sense is that we all want a future we can live in and be safe in. And what is common sense and what is very innate in all of us actually is that we want like all of us to be able to be safe, and like these very like basic things, like we want people to have a safe home, we want people to have access to clean water, like these things. The fact that anyone does not have access to those things is extreme and ridiculous and outrageous. And so what we need is not that radical in that sense. It's very common sense, like this future, and it's very possible, this future where all of us are safe. But in order to get there, we have to go to the roots of the systems that have caused this. And so in the meaning of radical as meaning go to the root, then it is that radical in that way, in the sense that we have to go to like the roots of things like colonialism, the roots of things like capitalism, the roots of things like white supremacy, and unpack those and understand those and dismantle those in order to create this better and transformed world. And the importance of doing that and going to the root is because it's very possible that we have a green transition that continues a very unequal world. And I think it's really important that people realise that, because I think this gets dismissed so often as if that, everyone who's pushing for climate action is great, or everyone or any climate action is good, and that we should just settle for whatever action we can get. It's very possible that we have a future that is eco-fascist instead. So, the billionaire class have continue to increase their wealth, but they've chosen to, fund technological solutions that will somehow, reduce emissions some way and make things greener. But all of these policies and these solutions have been done at the expense of the majority. Like that is possible. But that world is not a world that we want, because there are certain climate impacts that we will not be able to, we cannot prevent at this point, and we cannot reverse. And as resources do get more scarce, we don't want it to be that this, elite class, this billionaire class, this like 1% class hoard even more than they currently are, and there's even less available to the majority, when it's very possible that all of us could have everything that we need still in this future. And so instead of this eco-fascist future where there's this like restriction of freedoms of the majority of people, what we need and want is what is termed by many as an eco-socialist future. But I would not go on the news, for example, tomorrow. I mean, I don't want to go on the news at all anymore, but I wouldn't go on and be like, we need eco-socialism, because the majority of people watching would be like, I don't know what that means, and I have baggage attached to that word, to socialism and everything else, perhaps. So instead, we can talk about the things that we want for that. Like, what does that mean instead? And think how we can use the words we really mean. So a future where all of us have enough of what we need, a future where we all get to make decisions over the things that impact us, like directly, a future where we no longer have this like mass inequality. Like those things are very possible and are important. But in order to get that future, we have to kind of undo those roots that would push us towards that other way.
You just said you're not going on the news anymore, which makes me sad, but I think I probably understand why, although maybe you do want to explain, and also what's next.
I think that Grace Blakely actually explained very succinctly the reasons, which is the similar reasons for me, as why I've chosen not to do. I'm not saying I'll never go on again, but at least in this point in my life, I just want to invest my energy on community organising, to be honest, and doing political education and building the power of our communities. And there are a few ways in which I'm trying to do that. One of them is that I run a school of organising called Awetu, which comes from the anti-apartheid chant Amandla Awetu, which means the power is ours. So Awetu just means it's ours. And we basically run a Saturday school on Black liberation and climate justice, and it's like an incubator for young Black people who have a passion for their community and are very dedicated in the sense of caring about their direct community that they live in and changing something within that. But perhaps they haven't been organising before. They've never, been doing, or they've been doing activism in a very individual sense, or maybe they've just not understood, the language, or they've not had the access to the same spaces. And we run this programme that basically gives them the political education, the resources, the strategy, all of these things, so they can build their own movements from it, or to join movements and be part of building those. And it was basically me thinking, what could I have done with when I was 18, 19 and had just started organising and didn't know all of these things, and was going through all the drama of XR and everything. And what do I wish that I had known and could have learned? And it's not about us downloading this into these young people, because we realise they come with so much knowledge, and our way of viewing this is not that we are the beacons of knowledge who download into empty vessels, but instead it's we all come into the space and can bring in so much into it. But doing this work, I think I've also just found to be, for me, much more fulfilling as well, which I think is important, that we need to feel purpose in the work that we're doing. And also it's practically felt transformative in the sense of seeing these young people, come at the start, and then we're about to do the last week of this programme next week. And already our cohort make me tear up all the time. I think that they make a bit of jokes about how me and Jess, who I run it with, crying all the time. But only because it's so beautiful to see people recognise their own power and be so passionate about applying it and building their community and wanting to see change happen. And it's reminded me, I think, that change of us as people is so possible and important. And so I do that in a kind of more movement, that's more movement facing in some way sense. And then I'm trying to think more strategically with my social media platform of how to use that to do political education on a mass sense, because the right are using social media really well and podcasts really well, so it's really good you have this podcast, which I was saying to your producer before that it's brilliant that you guys are doing this work, and we need to also take ground in that space and use that space and leverage that space, and I think it's ground worth fighting for. And a lot of people do get their education from podcasts and from podcasts, from social media now, and so all of that is in conjunction with I'm still writing books, and I wrote a kids book this year, and actually not this, you said something about my outfit when I walked in, but I think this is kind of what I wear to when I visit schools.
Love it.
And it's really fun. And there's a school that's about, I think 20 minutes away from here, called London Fields Primary School, that have a classroom that's actually the Loach class. It's named after me.
That's so cool.
And they really inspired me in a big way to write a kids book. And because I think the education system as well, there's it really depends on your teacher, how much you get taught about these things. I wanted to create an accessible resource for kids and also for teachers to be able to use. Their teacher Jean is a legend icon at the moment. We love Jean. But those kids are able to access all that stuff because of that brilliant teacher. But I want more kids to be able to access these things and more things to be accessible. The average reading age in the UK is 9 years old. We need to be talking about these things as if people can actually understand them and read them. And then I'm currently writing another book about the billionaire class, but not trying to put all of my education just into my books. I'm really trying to make sure that we can kind of spread these things, but obviously those who want to dive deeper can access. And I really think books are really important, but I think it's important that we try and tackle from different angles. And so those are different angles that I've been trying to tackle.
It's a phenomenal amount of work. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I've really been uplifted in the last couple of days, when I check on TikTok, the amount of young Black creators who are supporting me, but more specifically the Green Party.
Yeah.
If any of them wanted to get involved with organising, so less about TikTok, which is an important part of it, but I think the work you're talking about is the kind of... In fact, I don't even mean to demean TikTok. I think it's all part of
but I get
space.
it. Last week at Awetu, I was basically, I was sharing with our cohort about a case study of an organising group that I've helped start up and been part of, so they could hopefully see how the kind of things we've been talking about can get very much applied, and then hopefully can help with how they're trying to apply it. And the case study that I used was Fossil Free Books, which is a group of literary workers who are organising around divestment and for like increased power in our literary industry to tackle the fossil fuel industry and Israel's genocide, apartheid, and occupation of Palestine. And that was started up by a few of us around the Edinburgh International Book Festival and some boycotts a few years ago. And part of that like case study that I talked to them about was actually to try and highlight to them that don't get distracted by social media, because so many people get way too distracted, I think, by social media in the sense of like, as if, success is likes and views and visibility. Like visibility does not equal success. And I think I've seen some people writing some very useful, I think, challenges to the Green Party around this of like, it's amazing that you guys are getting these numbers and these views. And like, I'm locked into every video that you post. I am there on the repost button.
Thank you.
And sharing it with friends and everything. But that does not equate power. Like, and it's really important that we recognise that, and that we do not get distracted in our strategy of just visibility. And this is one thing I really wanted to like hammer into them, because also they all think I'm old, which is so funny, because they're all like quite a bit younger than me. And they were kind of rinsing me for being old, which this is a new experience for me. But they are very much in this new generation of like, social media is so important, and I didn't grow up when I was the youngest with all the social media that we have today. Also, I'm only 27. I need to clarify that, like, just in case anyone.
Also, age is good. It's wisdom.
Yeah,
and experience.
No. I'm happy to have my wisdom and age. Oh, that feels bizarre to say. I don't even know age. Anyway, tangentially. But I think we can get distracted by the social media stuff. Yeah. And I know also that a lot of them who are part of our programme might have come because they follow me on social media, and so they might think that like power is or social media or like impact of social media. And for example, with Fossil Free Books, I had to show that like the way that we use social media was only ever if it was absolutely necessary for a strategic aim of our campaign. So for example, sharing our first like statement that was signed by like a bunch of authors to put pressure on Edinburgh International Book Festival to like leverage their relationship with asset manager Baillie Gifford to divest their £5 billion invested in fossil fuels. And that was, useful because the point of it was to like show people this is happening. Hopefully more authors would then find out about it, would sign it. It puts more pressure on Edinburgh International Book Festival. Whereas I see in a lot of organising spaces, movement spaces, that people feel this need to like keep up a social media that maybe is not necessary to your strategic aims. Jess used an example of West Nord for Palestine and how they didn't have a social media platform for a long time, and they only started one up when they had a film festival. And a part of that is also because I think sometimes, and I found it in some organising groups that I'm in, people can think that if they follow the account of that group, that means they are part of the group. Right. And that is not the case. Like, there is so much work that goes into the actual strategic and material changes that we want to see, that is not just sharing things on social media, whilst that is useful and important. And so I think it's really important for all of us to recognise that social media can be used as a tool, but it should be used as part of a wider strategy. And we should be very intentional of like, why are we sharing these things? Like, what is this adding into? Is this going to help our negotiations here? Or is this going to damage the social license of this company here that will lead to this? Or are we just doing it because we feel like we need to take up the space only, and then what capacity is that taking away from perhaps the like more useful work that's less visible and maybe doesn't make us feel as much of like a dopamine boost, but is like actually materially creating that change.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. In fact, the things I'm most excited about at the moment that are on social media are when I'm seeing pictures where people are out doing things because they've been inspired by the social media, but you go, actually, the social media was not the point. The point was seeing those people in the communities where there's now suddenly 100, 200 people in the community going, we've come here this Saturday to do the work because we were excited by social media.
Exactly. And that's why I think that like, the amount, I still am like kind of blown away, the amount of media that you've been doing. I don't know how you're okay, but I'm really glad that you are, and I'm so glad that we have you and your capacity and your ability to do this. But that is strategic in the sense of like, you need to build up the power of the Green Party and you need to like bring on more members on board. But we also just need to make sure that those members are become active and like are organising in their communities so that you're able to actually like gain this political power that we need, and that's translated. And I think Grace talked about this really brilliantly on a previous episode. So I'm not going to go over too much.
It's not just about electoral politics. Obviously, I'm the leader of the Green Party. I want to see more Green representation. And it's about that continuation and alignment that actually once you've got that Green representation, the work is being done as opposed to just you've won some seats.
Yeah, and also the like this thing of like the Overton window of possibility. So this like window of what is seen as, and also or you can also see it's like common sense. What is seen as like possible to be made happen, what is seen as common sense, like that is often pushed through by movements, like that's changed by movements, and so it's really important that we have grassroots movements who are changing that idea of possibility, because already, like we've seen with reform, that what is seen as like respectable or acceptable or possible has already been shifted like further away, with them saying ridiculous things like they would remove everyone with indefinite leave to remain. Like these are things that will, unless we challenge them, also in our like community organising, also in our like political education, all of these things that will become more like accepted. We've seen it with Trump as well, like how things that was previously seen as outrageous or ridiculous have become more acceptable. And so like grassroots movements are really, really important. Also because all of our power and change does not just come from government only. Like we can support our communities, we can like resource our communities, we can make more things possible. And we can make it that like certain industries can't do things anymore. Like it's we can stop things from happening. You can find where your local weapons factory is and you can picket it like out. So there are things that you can do to like materially disrupt these things and to make it that you can, for example, you can stop fossil fuel projects from getting insurance. This is one thing that like the ECOP, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline campaign, they're really focused on like, let's just make it that no one will insure this pipeline, and it literally can't happen. And they've managed to make it that almost every insurance company have like committed to not insuring it, and they just need to keep on that momentum. Like there are things that we can do that are outside of the political system, whilst we're obviously wanting policy change and things. But I don't want people to think, I have to wait, another 5 years until the general election, until we can push change. I know you can start doing that today.
And I tangented us. Is that what tangented us?
I feel like I've used a weird word, many weird words in this story.
To social media, but how does a young black person get involved with your school?
Oh yeah, great question. Well, we have a website, away2.co.uk. We can go on our social media at away2 as well, which is AWETHU, and you can find like ways to get in touch with us there. If you are someone who's not already been organising and you're really keen to, or maybe if you have been organising but you feel like you're like kind of nearing the beginning of your journey, we do run a programme every year that you can apply to. It's completely free. We like offer stipends for lost work. We cover travel. We basically make it that there's no barriers for anyone to be able to access it. It's completely like wheelchair accessible, and we can like meet access needs as well. So if you sign up for our like mailing list, then you'll find out whenever the next application's open. We also hopefully going to be doing some more offerings throughout the year. So like just keep an eye on, I think I'd say for now, just keep an eye on that. We are a very small team. So if anyone who's listening, is keen to resource our small team, that would be amazing. Because, Jess and I, we don't get paid for any of the work we do the way to, like all of our money goes into making sure that it's accessible as possible for the young people. But unfortunately we have to pay for like buildings and stipends and things like that we feel like are necessary for this work, for our cohort. And so, if there are other people who'd like to support us, that would be great.
I love it. People can afford to open up your wallets.
Yeah. Or like funders as well. But we do have an open collective actually that people can. But I always feel hard like asking people to, even though I think redistribution is really important and I really like stand by that, there's just so many things that obviously need support. But if this is something that someone feels compelled to support, then that would be wonderful.
I love that so much. My favourite versions of this podcast are where I forget I'm on a podcast and I feel like I'm just chatting with a friend, taking advice, learning things. And this has really, really felt like that. So thank you so much, Mikaela. I've loved it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And honestly, thank you for what you're doing. Like, I'm so proud to have joined the Greens to support you. My neighbours joined, like my parents thinking about joining, like pretty much actually many of my friends have joined.
I remember your parents. They were just in the audience with the biggest smiles, like so happy.
Yeah, they're really, honestly, you've made people feel excited about the possibility of change again, and so many people are so grateful for that. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for the energy that you're bringing to this, and also thank you for not like disregarding or leaving behind grassroots movements whilst doing that. I think that like balance is really, really important, and for being open for challenges.
Yeah, the grassroots movement need to be at the heart of our bigger movement, right?
Yeah, big time. No, really respect you, really grateful for your work. And,
right,
thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hey Zack, it's Chris Packham again. I'm ringing to ask if you've switched to Ecotalk yet. Come on. The beavers are waiting for you, and you can go and have a look at them at ecotalk.co.uk.